As Patches O'Houlihan said in Dodgeball to Gordon, you got to get angry. You got to get mean. Where's your killer instinct, son? Where's the Wild's killer instinct? We'll recap the Sweden games, what is coming up this week for the Wild, as well as Bill Guerin taking the team to task before they flew out to Sweden. All that and more on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, this is Brandon Duham, and this is Locked on Wild.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new content throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, Alex Micheletti joins us to recap the Sweden games. We'll talk about both losses and why, while there was improvements, still a lot of the same issues exist. We'll talk about Bill Guerin taking the team to task before they flew out to Sweden, and just a general lack of killer instinct by the Wild so far this season. Oh, and Freddy Gaudreau getting in overtime over Marco Rossi and being on the ice for the game-winning goal. Alex, a lot to get to here today. We're sitting here after the Minnesota Vikings found a way to snatch a defeat from the jaws of victory. And so just kind of another frustrating weekend for the Minnesota sports scene, and the Wild certainly part of that, with 2 overtime losses, a shootout loss, and an overtime loss. And so I guess matter-of-factly, they did get 2 out of the 4 points, which is, I think, what we expected. And the play was better in areas that have been struggling, but again, it's 2 losses, and you kind of find different ways to lose both games. Not being able to crack Forsberg in game 1, and just kind of turtling in game 2 after getting a 1-0 lead. And so, yes, there were some areas that were improved, but still a lot of problems that this team is trying to figure out.
I mean, it boils down to the top players not producing at all. Where's Kirill Kaprizov? Where's Matt Boldy? I know Kirill is getting a ton of heat, and it should be the same for Matt Boldy too. Where has he been? I mean, ever since he signed the contract, it hasn't been Matt Boldy. So I don't know what's going on with that. Just that is the most shocking thing right now, because they need those two to produce, and if they don't produce, I mean, good luck. That's why they're losing. So you're seeing every other team with their elite players stepping up. The Wild are nowhere to be found, and that's frightening.
Yeah, and somebody made a really good point on Twitter. I was trying to save the tweet, and I think it was in the YouTube comments as well, in that if you're not getting like adequate play from Kaprizov and Boldy, that's $16 million that is not helping you out at this point. And you add that in with the other 14 that you are just waiting for it to be available, and you got $30 million that is just kind of
non-existent.
Yeah, that gets to be a tricky thing for a team to overcome. And it's funny because I thought Boldy was better over these 2 games, was more aggressive at least, but we had 4 total shots from Kirill Kaprizov over the 2 games, and it's very clear that he is either hurt or there is something that is so embedded into his head that is just completely throwing him off his game, that at this point, I think honestly, I think you have to look at giving him an opportunity to just figure himself out, because he's not making near the type of impact that you need. And like, playing him on the ice at this point, I don't know how much longer you can afford to just have him try to play out of it.
You look what happened last night. The Columbus Blue Jackets healthy scratched Patrick Laine, and he's making almost $9 million a year. So they're not afraid to do it. But if Kirill is if he is truly hurt, he's hurting the game. He's hurting the team more by playing.
Mm-hmm.
And so he needs to, if he does need, if he is hurt, he needs to sit out. It's clearly what needs to happen. And if he was more hurt than what he let on coming into the year too, that's a bad sign too, that he tried to play through something without saying anything to anybody. That's not a good look.
Yeah, and it's weird optics right now, because you have all this kind of uncertainty and secrecy around what happens to start the week, where there was the report that Kirill went to get an MRI. MRI came up clean, but Dean, alluding to the fact that he had a bump on his body, was I think the exact phrasing by Dean. But again, it's nothing that popped up on the MRI. And so, like, what extent can something be bothering somebody that much if you're classifying it as a bump? Like, it feels like it's got to be something a little more substantial than that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we talked about it on the live streams. He's not skating on his edges at all.
No.
It does not look like the Kirill Kaprizov pre Logan Stanley WWE tackle. He did the splits, and I don't know. It's like Logan Stanley took he was like a Monstar from Space Jam, and he took all the powers out of Kirill Kaprizov.
Boy, we are hitting all of the elite movie references here so far today. There was another comment in the stream as well, which thank you to everybody that joined for those again. By the way, those were both amazing. Somebody mentioned in the comments, I hope we're not dealing with another Matt Dumba situation where you see an injury just completely derail a player. But honestly, like, I think it's moved past a slow start. I think we can move it out of the slow start realm to, okay, there is something definitely going on here that is more than just somebody taking a little bit longer to get up to speed on the NHL season. I think it's definitely past that now.
Yeah, it's not 5-10 games. I mean, you're getting close to 20 games. So I mean, that's a significant chunk of the season. There's no more excuses for a slow start, especially for a team that doesn't want to bottom out. It looks like, but still thinks that they can make the playoffs. You can't just continue to get by with this effort of your superstars. No way.
Yeah, and the old adage that teams that are in a postseason spot at Thanksgiving usually find their way to the playoffs at the end of the season. Well, guess what? The Minnesota Wild do not have any games remaining before Thanksgiving. They play the day after. But if you look at the standings right now in the Western Conference, the Minnesota Wilds not only are not in the playoff picture, they have to vault 3 teams. They have to vault 4 teams to get into a wild card spot, even, as it's Dallas, Colorado, and Winnipeg in the division, and St. Louis and Arizona are your wild card teams. You're 8 points back right now of a divisional spot. You're 4 points back of a wild card, but like, it's I don't know. It just, a lot of the same issues as last year but you haven't really gotten the signs that the goaltending is going to turn around. And so at this point,
defense too, the defense doesn't look like it's improved at all either. I mean, even with everybody back, the same mistakes are continuing to happen, and especially in overtime. Oh boy.
And we'll talk about we'll kind of loop the turtling of play, because I think that was a huge problem against Toronto. Is there was a good push for like the first 5 minutes of the game, and then all of a sudden after the Wild went up 1-0, it seemed like they just started to tense up, they started to tighten up, and then Toronto scores 3 straight, and you have large stretches of play where you're just basically hoping that you are able to hang on for like 2 periods, hang on to a 1-0 lead. And the Maple Leafs are able to take the lead and to eventually win. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about Bill Guerin taking his roster to task before they left for Sweden, which that was actually just released this weekend that happened. And we'll talk about just an interesting observation that we've seen so far from this team, as well as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wilds after this. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, you may have noticed that we have switched back to the live premieres for our episodes, and there is a reason for that, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts from Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Go to the Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Minnesota sports fans, Locked On Sports Minnesota has one for you as well. So just follow the redirect after this episode is finished, and you can view sports 24/7. Honestly, it's one of the coolest things of all time. Like, just it's like I've got the TV on in the background, just going through episodes, scrolling through teams, scrolling through different huge topics. It's honestly one of a kind. And again, it's in my opinion, humble brag, Locked On just continuing to push the envelope for sports content. So happy to be a part of that, to say the least, but not happy to continue to be talking about what is going on with this Minnesota Wild team. And Alex, we found out, courtesy of Michael Russo and Joe Smith, after the trip was essentially finished, that Bill Guerin took his team to task before the road trip started. And from the sounds of it, there was some yelling. There was a lot of pointing out that the team is not playing well right now. And a lot of good it did you. I mean, you lose both games in OT, and it just led me to make, I think, an interesting observation about this team. And the question came from the Soda Pod. So shout out to Hoppy and Isha. they were talking about this in their live stream. Who is like the gamer on this team that is going to, when the team is in a skid, is going to be the one that just decides that enough is enough and ends up ending a losing streak by themselves? I mean, beyond maybe Joel Eriksson Ek, in terms of just like fierce competitiveness, I don't think the Wild have anybody that falls under that category.
No, that's what's very scary. Every other team has that. You look at Colorado. There's plenty of guys on there. When Nathan MacKinnon gets in one of those modes, I mean, obviously he's one of the best players in the NHL, but he also has that instinct where when he has to, get the team motivated and has that killer instinct, he gets going. I mean, you look at Jason Robertson in Dallas. I mean, all the competitors within the division. Heck, even Arizona, Clayton Keller, who's emerging as as a stone cold little assassin out there. There's Philip Forsberg with Nashville. I mean, these guys, when they need to take over, they do it for their team, and they Kirby Puckett. They say, "Hop on my back. I'm going to lead you guys to a victory." And for whatever reason, the Wild just don't have that. And the guys that they're paying, to be that aren't showing up. Even if they did have that, they still aren't showing up, which is very, very scary.
Yeah, and it's like it's players that just step up when the moment is the brightest. Like obviously one of the more recent examples we think of is Matthew Tkachuk for Florida last year, just stepping up and just refusing to take no for an answer throughout the entirety of the postseason. Mark Stone for Vegas, another great example. Jack Eichel for Vegas, another good example. All these guys that just when the moment is the brightest or when the team absolutely has to have a goal, absolutely has to have a win, those guys just say, all right, boys, I got it. And it strikes me as odd. And I know I think going into this season would have assumed that Kirill Kaprizov was that guy, but you can't put him in that category right now.
Right now.
It just strikes me as weird considering the type of player that Bill Guerin was, that this team doesn't have that. Like you look at what Bill Guerin was throughout the course of his playing career. He's a lunatic. Yeah. He's a lunatic out on the ice.
Teammates in practice. Yeah. Craziness.
And that you don't have that. And honestly, that's why I made the dodgeball reference to start the show, is because a lot of times out there on the ice, this team looks like Gordon in dodgeball before he gets mad, and you get Patch O'Houlihan having to jolt some anger into him to try to get him going. Like I don't know. I feel like you should just be able to kind of get yourself going without having to get the talks, without having to get the like coaches ripping you a new one. Like you should be able to just kind of know, okay, we have to just start taking games over. But we don't see it. We don't see it 17 games into the season. There hasn't been an instance other than maybe the Rangers game in which they were down 3-0. There hasn't been an instance in which this team has just said, we're tired of losing. Enough is enough. And that's a problem.
Yeah, the inconsistencies, especially in how tight this division is now, you can't just keep having that. And then it's with this team too, it just seems like it is right now. The lunches come in bunches, and they just don't know how to handle adversity very well. I don't know what the deal is, but they just they're letting the refs get in their heads again, and that's no bueno. And I don't know, there just seems to be another huge disconnect between the coaching staff and the players right now.
Yeah, it's a mess. And I know there's kind of a push against in some circles against the like Dean has lost the room. And it may be that he hasn't, but you you can't tell me what you see on the ice in just the amount of just attention to detail mistakes that this team makes. The turnovers in the defensive zone, the inability to hit from right in front of the net, and just so many little mistakes. You can't tell me that somebody else could come in here as head coach and just drill that into this team so that those weren't issues. You can't tell me that that's not a coaching thing.
Right. Yeah. No, it's you look at special teams. It's just been a complete mess all season. It looked a little bit better in Sweden, but is that going to continue? Is that going to continue in North America? Not in this weird foreign country setup where you and I during the stream we saw the clock was running just at times when it shouldn't have been. It's just things weren't how they normally are for an NHL game. Of course, just considering where they were at.
Couple of tires with some low air pressure throughout the course of the weekend. Yes. having to tell the Zamboni crew when to go out and resurface or when to just clean the ice off. I did hear on Fan Line with your dad and Kevin Fallness, two certified A+ers. Fallness asked somebody what their sense of kind of where this Wild team is at right now. And they put it in I think a really good way before we move on to talk about another coaching gripe that I had from this weekend. They said that the low fuel light just popped on for this Wild team, and you're out in the middle of the country. You don't know how far you have to go. You don't know how much gas you have in the tank. I was like, that's pretty accurate, I think.
That's a good analogy for sure
of what we've seen. But yeah, we're Gordon. We're non-angry Gordon from Dodgeball at this point. And the fact that it takes getting a punch to the lower the nether regions that it takes getting a punch there to get you angry, that's a problem. So I don't know what they do about that, but I know another thing that I kind of was griping about is the prodigal son returned to the lineup, and he was welcomed by his surrogate father with every responsibility that you could possibly expect. And so we'll talk about getting Freddy Gaudreau back, but also pushing Marco Rossi out of overtime. I don't like that. We'll talk about that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Sleeper. A new NHL season brings all sorts of responsibilities, whether it be Marco Rossi scoring a goal, Brandon Duhaime scoring a goal, or the Minnesota Wild in some alternate universe hoisting the Stanley Cup. And you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. All you have to do is pick whether stud players like Connor McDavid, Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, or Nathan McKinnon will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. Lineups are so easy to fill out. You can do so in under 60 seconds. And you can also play daily fantasy NFL, NBA, MLB, and college football on Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, once again, make sure you check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 YouTube channel, as well as Locked On Sports Minnesota keeping you up to date 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with a full rotation of the latest episodes and the biggest news from your favorite Locked On experts. So make sure to check that out on the Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel, as well as Locked On Sports Minnesota, available now and running as we speak. So finishing up a few things from the weekend, and we'll take a look at what is coming up here this week as well, joined by Alex Micheletti. And Alex, we got Freddy Gaudreau back in the lineup, and I had to laugh because you just thrust him immediately into the second line. He 2C, Freddy 2C. You've taken Ryan Hartman out of a center spot and now have made him back into a wing. And Gaudreau comes in, and actually, I'm surprised now in looking at the minute total, just 15 minutes, which is sizably less than several of the top players on this team. But then in overtime, Gaudreau goes in as one of the first players out there, and Freddie was on the ice for 3 of the 4 goals that Toronto scored. And so this is another thing that I think is frustrating, is that we continue to get kind of this lip service in that, yeah, Marco Rossi's playing great. He's one of the best players that we have on the team. Oh, but the security blanket is back. So we better make sure that we give him those requisite opportunities as we hop out there on the ice for OT, and then we end up losing the game.
Yeah, it is so frustrating. He doesn't look ready to come back. Well, I don't know why you pick the Toronto game for him to be in the lineup. It just it looked like he was skating in quick sand. He was on the ice for every goal. So that's a problem. Yeah, it's so frustrating.
And Vinny Lettieri was playing fine.
Right.
He was playing fine.
Hey, Vinny was Vinny was out there in overtime for the Ottawa game. So I mean, they clearly like him. I don't know.
So you throw Freddie in ice cold in the middle of a road trip
against Toronto with that speed.
And that's another move that I think reeks of kind of where the situation is at with this team and starting to really feel the pressure. But honestly, like, you could have then given him additional days to get back and just continue to go with, I think, a combination on that fourth line. And not to say that Duhaime, Dewar, and Maroon didn't do the job against Toronto, because they did, because they always do. But I think we were seeing that from Duhaime, Dewar, and Lettieri too, is that, then you can have the combination that you were initially going to try in Hartman, Foligno, and Maroon as your third line center. But it's like, oh, okay, he says he's ready to rock. Let's just thrust him right in like nothing happened. And
another thing that needs to be talked about before we wrap things up is the guys that are on no move clause, in their contracts. Yeah. They're just coasting. It seems like they just know that, hey, I have a no movement, so you can't do anything, and you have to pay me, which is wild. I mean, we have a guy in Marcus Johansson who maybe the Wild are regretting giving that money to, instead of Gus Nyquist, who is off to a really good start in Nashville, because Johansson's doing nothing. And he, in that overtime, let William Nylander get right to Fleury, and then Fleury had no chance. Marcus Johansson pulled a Dmitry Kulikov against the Blues in the playoffs in the Olay defense. You can't do that against a guy like William Nylander. He smelled blood in the water and said, "Okay, Marcus, thank you so much for giving me all the space in the world as a fellow Swede to get one by Fleury." It was so frustrating.
Yeah, again, let's just glide through this because Denny nailed it. 2 of the top 9 2 of the top 9 are not currently anchored by non-movement or no trade clauses. Kirill, but his kicks in next season.
Right.
Basically, the 2 players that don't are Joel Eriksson and Matt Boldy. That's it. Those are the only 2 in your top 9 that don't have
It's crazy.
trade protection. Honestly, I'm going to say this. I think the only thing that is going to really get everybody in that category going is if one of them gets traded.
Right.
Like, I don't know.
That's a complete wake up call.
I don't know
would
how
actually
else you do it. Like, I don't know how else you jolt this group to life. Like, it's I don't know.
Matt Boldy's been talked to too, and
multiple
times, which is frightening when you have that big of a contract. What, 7 years, right?
7 by 7.
Yeah, that's frightening when someone earning that amount of money per year has to have a sit down.
Every move seems rushed. You could have gone into this off season with, I mean, you would have still signed Johansson probably to the 2-year deal. But you could have gone into this off season, if this season plays out the way that it looks like it's going to, with Matt Zuccarello on an expiring deal, Marcus Foligno on an expiring deal, Ryan Hartman on an expiring deal, and giving yourself an opportunity to get a little bit of a facelift to where you can go into the final year of these lean cap seasons and say, okay, we know it's going to be tough again to compete, but we're going to come at it from a little bit of a different angle to see if we can just kind of rise above. And instead, what you get is you come home with the 2000 Honda Civic, thinking that you're going to get a new car or at least something newer. And your parents come home and say, yeah, we just re-upped for a 72-month lease. And you're like,
right.
What now? What happened? So that's where a lot of the frustration comes in. And as you can probably tell, we're here for it. Like, right. I truly do not know, short of, well, everybody's going to have to be better next season. There really is no way to do anything about this.
No, you can't, because of those no movements. It's frustrating. No flexibility.
No flexibility at all. And so looking into the next week, everybody needs to be better, other than probably Marco Rossi, Brock Faber, and you could probably put Joel Eriksson in that category too. Everybody needs to be better. And so that's the elite level analysis that we can throw at you here at the end of the show. Everybody needs to be better because you're playing Colorado to start your resumption of play. And then you've got one of these just bizarre stretches of games again coming up in December, in which you're going to play the Pacific Division 6 straight games. At Calgary, at Vancouver, at Edmonton, at Seattle, home against Calgary, home against Vancouver. Then you play Boston 2 out of the next 4 games. You play at Pittsburgh, you play Montreal, you play Detroit, you play Winnipeg twice to close out the year.
Yeah, that's brutal travel. It just what else is there to say? I mean, you're gonna really have to manage minutes for sure.
Again, I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. I'd love to meet with whoever put the schedule together. I'm not mad. Right. I'm just disappointed.
Yeah, it's.
I'm not mad.
Yeah, I mean, the Wild definitely got the end of the stick of things. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Well, I think that's where we'll leave it, because I'm kind of getting tired of just screaming into a microphone. Did a lot of that this weekend. So
Yes.
we'll leave you with that, but it's frustrating. We have to be better.
Yes.
Thank you. Just
And the prize is Colorado on Friday.
yeah.
Thanks,
Prize is
thanks NHL for the Black Friday prize.
Prize is like an 8:00 start because it's a nationally televised 7:30 game, so it'll probably be closer to 8. Yeah, that's all we got. So thank you for tuning into today's episode of Locked On Wild. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and join us for plenty of content as we roll through the rest of this season into the off season as well. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.